One that, let me see, no floor speeches. So I'm going to make this a little bit briefer. All of the discussion so far has focused on the ways in which ed reform is happening when the adults are getting along, when adults are able to work together collaboratively and then decide that they will act in the best interest of kids. But what's slightly concerning is that we haven't addressed models that are kid-focused, and to see it grow and expand, and to not see there as being a contention when that exists as well.
That was great modeling of how to ask a tough question in a very collaborative way.
Can I take a stab?
Andres, please.
Well, part of, thank you, first of all. The question for me is this. There is plenty, because I heard it stated earlier today, there is plenty of evidence that there are settings that are not unionized that are working beautifully. But there's also plenty of evidence that there are settings that are not unionized that are not working beautifully at all. There is plenty of evidence that there are traditional settings that are working beautifully. They're hardly ever mentioned. What tends to take the focus of the attention are the traditional settings that are not working at all. And I believe in Karl Popper, the scientific principle. If you see proof of something that disproves the theory, then you have to rethink the theory. And there is a trope in the air now, and you've all watched Waiting for Superman, that it's about charters. But and by the way, I'm a huge proponent of charters. I have almost doubled them in Baltimore. But hold on. But there was a little factoid in that movie that showed that only 17% of charters outperform traditional schools. So it is about implementation, and it's about people. It's about people. And the thing that I continually come to is that if it's always going to be about people and people's ability to, I'm going to use the expression again because I'm crazy about sports, move the ball on behalf of certain things that work for kids. And that necessarily requires that there be a conversation. What that conversation is about, the friction in the conversation is endlessly variable and negotiable, and it's going to depend on many, many things, including things like what's the political will in a community in order to make certain things happen. And this is where leadership matters tremendously, because it's going to take somebody like Dr. Mayer and his mayor to decide that whatever has been in place in the past has to change. And then there has to be a conversant in the other side of the conversation that says, you know what, we might not exactly agree on what that means, but fundamentally, you're right. And then once that happens, things can move. If it doesn't happen, then it won't move regardless of what's agreed upon. And the question is always going to be, how do you get it to move? And that's a leadership question. It's not going to be about taking a position up front. It's going to be about how to get an outcome happen. So that's how I see it.
If you look at successful schools, whether they're unionized or not, what ends up happening is underneath them, there is a trust and a working together amongst the adults on behalf of kids. I get very concerned with the theory right now of adults versus kids, because at the end of the day in education, it is about the adults working on behalf of kids. And I have actually and I've worked in this field for over 25 years. I have not actually ever met someone who went into teaching because he or she didn't actually want to help children. So this, you will probably find some examples of when there is variance, but by and large, whether it's a unionized or non-unionized settings, the adults who work closest to kids actually are trying to get the tools and conditions they need to help kids. What we're trying to do here is show a best practice. We believe, or at least I'll say for us, at the AFT, we believe in helping to change schools and transform them for the knowledge economy. We've been talking about that around the country, and that may be also part of the difference in terms of why these contracts are starting to pop like this.
So thanks to a member of the audience who will remain anonymous who used the texting option to get a question to the moderator. and some of you have my cell phone number, so I better be careful.
Is it someone who works for one of these two?
I think that we'll just leave it anonymous and leave it at that. But you know, this frame around urgency versus collaboration, is there a conflict there? Because you know, and just to speak for myself, wearing my advocacy hat, I spend an awful lot of time, unfortunately, in rooms with people who make decisions, and we have some incredible champions who are in those rooms, elected officials and otherwise. But we also have people representing stakeholders as well as elected officials themselves who do not seem to be able to combine the notion of collaboration and urgency. And that what you end up is collaboration that sort of pushes the, you know, it's not urgent, or you end up with urgency and conflict. And is that a zero-sum game? I don't even answer that. Let's get another question. But just think, please weave that into your...
That never works at first.
Oh, okay. My question is a bit pragmatic. I want to first start by saying thank you to the 4 members of the panel for what you've done to implement teacher evaluation and development, and to many of those who are sitting in this room, because I know it's been a major effort to do so. But given the economic climate and the deficits, I think, Randy, you've made a major point of saying it's really about development as a function of what comes out of the evaluation, if this is going to be successful and sustainable. But the problem is now the money that we need to put the infrastructure in place to support it, it may be gone. So my question is, again, from a pragmatic perspective, what can we do to keep this momentum going, to keep these systems that have been modeled by these schools and districts something that others adopt and move forward with?
I just feel it's important enough, and certainly I've got to do some cutting for the 11-12 school year. But this to me is so important. I mean, I've made a commitment to the New Haven community that we're going to continue the school reform effort that we're in. We're going to go out and find ways of raising money from foundations, other philanthropists, and people are coming forward without us even going after some to say, what can we do to help financially to keep the momentum going in New Haven? I have vowed I will not let it drop. I will not let it stop. We will find a way in order to keep it going in New Haven.
And that said, in the context of a budget where New Haven, and I'll just put on my Board of Ed hat for a moment, $14.5 million hole in our budget next year, which is equivalent to 190 staff positions. And that's what we're looking at in New Haven and how this plays out.
And another point, I mean, I spent my morning negotiating with a charter organization to come in for next school year to take over school. That's the way I spent my morning. And, I don't know where I'm going to get the money from, Howard, but I'll get it from somewhere.
If you look at the countries around the world, they do things quite differently than we do. And they focus on the development end, not on the sanction end and not on the testing end. I'm talking about the countries that outcompete us. And we just had this international summit with about 20 of the high-performing countries around the world, including Singapore. I don't know why China considers Shanghai and Hong Kong separate countries, but that's for a different panel. But when you look at Finland, when you look at Singapore, when you look at Shanghai, there's a lot of attention still spent on maintaining the investment in education. And what you're seeing, frankly, from poll after poll across the country, and I've been in a whole bunch of places, people do not want these cuts in education. They are willing to spend, even in these really tight times, more money to maintain the investment on behalf of kids.
So I'm sure someone here probably has a microphone who wants to ask about LIFO, but I'm sure that question will be forthcoming. Who has, in the back, do you have a microphone? Stand up, please, if you do.
Hello, my name's Lisa Thompson. I'm a parent and a businesswoman and now a community activist in the city of Norwalk. I'd like to hold up the front page of the Hour today. It says, "Call for calm in union and board talks." the question I have, and I'm the daughter of a school teacher, by the way, as well. As a voter and a parent and a business person, I can vote my board members out, my Board of Ed. I can replace my superintendent. I can replace my elected officials. What do you do when you're calling for collaboration, and we're in tough times right now, and this is kind of directed at Randi, and I'm pro-teacher all the way, but what happens when you have union leadership that have been there for 20 or 30 years, and they say no, 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 and the community is held hostage? I talk to teachers, I talk to principals. In our city, both are unionized. And in the hallways, they will quietly tell you, yes, we need to change this, and privately and quietly. But as a collective group, they fall in line behind the leadership, and leadership that we have not been able to change. How do you do that to try to keep your city from falling?
Norwalk, Connecticut, the Norwalk Federation of Teachers, I believe.
So we've actually spent a bunch of time, I haven't spent a bunch of time in Norwalk, but I've spent a bunch of time in Connecticut. And we are, you know, what I see in terms of our leadership, I can't talk to every single one of the 3,500 locals that we have, but I see a huge sea change in terms of an understanding about how we end up having to be parts of communities and how we have to engage in terms of dealing with all the issues that are confronting us. Now, that's part of the reason that you see all these different contracts and all these different settings. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is people start asking for the trust to be on the individual union or teacher's part first before we create the trust in the environment. What's happened in both New Haven and in Baltimore, and what didn't happen in Washington, was that we created an environment of trust and a shared vision for what we needed to do. Now, I don't know the specific situation in Norwalk. I don't, you know, I can...
His name is Bruce Mellion, if you want to reach out.
And I certainly have a whole bunch of superintendents that I would say the same thing to you about, too.
Fair enough.
But what
And
my point is, what we have to do is create a different normal. And that's part of the reason why many of us around are pushing at what is our shared responsibility, as opposed to if someone believes, so in speech after speech that I have given this year, I say two things to union folk. I say, number one, don't give up. Number two, don't hunker down. Number three, come up with really interesting and ingenious proactive solutions for how we navigate through these shoals. Because at the end of the day, our future is wrapped up in the quality in what we do. So I'll have that same, I'll take on superintendents in the same way, and I'll take on our own leaderships in the same way. But what I've seen in my experience, because there is, you know, a fight to the finish in New York City right now after 4 years of a lot of calm and focus and urgent focus on achievement. But my experience has been when you start seeing these really adversarial, terrible situations, it starts with a lack of trust, and you have to get underneath that first.
All right.
What I will do is I will actually go and find out what the situation is. And then if I find out what the situation is and I work with our folks and they want us to work with them, then I will intervene and intercede. But it may actually be a phone call to a whole bunch of people. Right. Right, exactly.
Look at this, collaborative problem solving right in the room.
But that is, if you actually believe in changing this, change in education is hard. If it was so easy, we would have done it a long time ago. because people want kids to succeed. And so the issue becomes, how do you build on what you've learned? And how do you use the circumstances we have to actually